Before you read a single word of the story, I want to ask you something. If your 7-year-old granddaughter grabbed your sleeve at a family Christmas dinner, pulled you into the hallway, and whispered that she had heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, would you believe her? Or would you pat her on the head and tell her little girls shouldn't eavesdrop? I used to think I'd know exactly what to do in a moment like that. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer. I built bridges. I'm a man who believes in evidence, in load-bearing calculations, in things you can measure and verify. I do not believe in hunches. But my granddaughter Penny saved my life. And she did it with 11 words whispered into my left ear on December 23rd, 2 years ago. I'm 63 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the mountains, in the house my wife Judith and I bought the year our daughter was born. Judith passed 8 years ago, breast cancer, caught too late. After she was gone, I threw myself into work for a few years, and then I retired, and then I learned to be alone in the particular way that men of my generation learn to be alone, quietly and without much complaint. My daughter's name is Audrey. She's 36. She has her mother's eyes and, unfortunately, her father's stubborn streak. When she was 28, she married a man named Trevor Holt. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, the kind of charm that fills a room and makes you feel, somehow, slightly smaller by comparison. He had a firm handshake. He told good stories. He laughed at his own jokes just a beat before everyone else, like he'd already decided the joke had landed. I did not trust him, but Audrey loved him, and Judith always said I was too suspicious of people. So I kept my mouth shut and I walked my daughter down the aisle and I danced with her at the reception, and I told myself I was wrong about Trevor Holt. For 7 years, I mostly convinced myself that was true. He and Audrey had Penny when Audrey was 30. A little girl with dark curly hair and her grandmother's laugh, this high surprise sound, like joy had caught her off guard. Penny was the best thing in my life after Judith died. Every Saturday I'd drive down to their place in Weaverville, 20 minutes south, and Penny and I would bake something ridiculous. Peanut butter cookies, lemon bars, one disastrous attempt at homemade pretzels, and she'd tell me about kindergarten, then first grade, then second grade, with the kind of unfiltered detail that only children offer. Who was mean at recess? What the lunch lady smelled like? Whether her teacher's shoes were ugly? I knew that child. I knew her. The way you know someone you've watched breathe since the first day of their life, which is why on December 23rd, when she grabbed my sleeve and pulled me into the hallway near the guest bathroom, I stopped. I didn't pat her head. I crouched down to her level, the way I always did, my knees protesting like they always do now. And I looked her in the eyes. "Grandpa," she said very quietly, "I heard Daddy on the phone. He said you're not going to be around much longer, and that's good for everyone." I looked at her for a long moment. "When did you hear this, sweetheart?" "Last week. I was under the bed looking for my other sneaker. He was talking to someone. He said your name, Grandpa. He said Ray. He said Ray's a problem, and after the holidays, that problem's going away. My name is Raymond Kowalski. Everyone calls me Ray." I kept my face very still. 34 years of engineering reviews, of presenting to city councils, of delivering bad news about budgets and timelines, you learn to keep your face still. "Did he see you?" I asked. She shook her head. Her eyes were very serious. Penny was always a serious child when something mattered. "Okay," I said. "You did the right thing telling me. This is just between us for now, okay? Don't tell Mommy yet. I need to figure some things out first." She nodded and then hugged me around the neck, fast and tight, and ran back to the living room where her father was laughing his too early laugh at something on the television. I stood in that hallway for about 2 minutes, and then I went back to the living room and sat in my usual chair and watched Trevor Holt, with completely different eyes. Here's what I knew going into that December. 6 months earlier, I had quietly updated my estate plan. I am not a wealthy man by any dramatic standard, but 34 years of a steady engineer's salary, a paid-off mortgage, and a life insurance policy from Judith's passing had left me in a comfortable position. My estate, the house, the investments, a savings account, the life insurance came to roughly $1.2 million. In my updated will, 60% went to Audrey, 30% into a trust for Penny's education, and 10% to a small scholarship fund I'd set up at the university where I got my degree. I had not told Trevor about the specifics, but I had mentioned to Audrey over the phone in September that I'd updated everything and that she and Penny were well taken care of. Audrey told Trevor. I was certain of that. Not because she's careless, but because they were married, and married people talk, so Trevor knew roughly what I was worth. And apparently, he had decided that waiting for a 63-year-old man in good health to die naturally was taking too long. That night, after the Christmas dinner dishes were done and Penny was in bed and Audrey was cleaning up the kitchen, I sat in the living room with Trevor and I watched him. He was relaxed, comfortable. He poured himself a bourbon and offered me one, and I accepted it. And I held a glass and barely sipped it, and I thought about all the things a phrase like, that problem's going away could mean. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe Trevor had been venting about some professional frustration and had used my name in a different context. I'm an engineer. I don't assume. I measure. On the drive home that night, I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia I'd worked with for 15 years. I told her I needed a meeting early in the new year and that I needed to treat it with complete discretion. She didn't ask questions. That's what I pay her for. Then I called my doctor. I had a general checkup scheduled for February, and I moved it to the first week of January. And I asked, awkwardly, whether there was any standard blood work that would catch certain kinds of slow poisoning. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. My doctor, who has known me for 12 years and is not easily alarmed, said she would run a comprehensive panel and that I should come in as soon as possible. I want to pause here and tell you something. These phone calls, these careful, practical steps were the easiest part of what came next. They gave me something to do with the fear. An engineer's instinct, when something threatens the structure, you assess the damage before you start the repair. The hard part was the week between Christmas and New Year's. Audrey called every day. She wanted to talk about the holidays, about Penny's new bicycle, about a TV show she and Trevor were watching. And I talked about all of those things. I asked about Penny's first time riding the bike without training wheels. I laughed at the right moments. I said I loved her and I meant it completely, and I said nothing about the hallway on December 23rd. My blood work came back in the second week of January. My doctor called me herself, which is never a good sign. There were elevated markers consistent with chronic low-level heavy metal exposure. Not dramatic, not acute. The kind of thing that over months or years accumulates quietly. The kind of thing that a man in his mid-60s might attribute to fatigue, to getting older, to grief. She referred me to a toxicologist. I didn't tell Audrey. The toxicologist confirmed it. Arsenic, low levels, consistent, ongoing. Nothing that would show up in a casual examination. The kind of dosage that would, over time, perhaps over another year, perhaps two, cause organ damage that would look, to most eyes, like a sick old man declining the way sick old men do. I sat in that office and I was very quiet for a long time, and then I thanked the doctor, and I drove to a diner I'd never been to before, and I ordered coffee, and I sat in a booth by the window, and I let myself feel it for about 15 minutes. The fear, the grief, because grief is the right word when you discover that your child's husband wants you dead. The strange, hollow ache of realizing how long this might have been happening without you knowing. And then I paid for the coffee and I drove to my attorney's office. Here's what we did, and I want to be clear. Everything we did was legal. Everything we did was measured and documented and handled through proper channels. I am an engineer. I do not build things that fall down. First, I immediately revoked my existing will and had a new one drafted. In the new will, Trevor Holt was specifically excluded by name. I also added a clause, my attorney's idea, that specified any legal challenge to the will by a spouse of a beneficiary would result in that beneficiary's share being reduced by 50% and redirected to the scholarship fund. Audrey's inheritance was protected. Trevor could never touch it. Second, I secured the toxicology report and all supporting medical documentation. My attorney helped me file a formal report with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. I want to be honest about how that went. Slowly and with a great deal of frustration. Proving chronic low-level poisoning is not like a crime drama. There were interviews, there were warrants, there were weeks of nothing and then a phone call. But before any of that resolved, I made some other arrangements. Trevor Holt worked as a regional sales manager for a medical device company headquartered in Charlotte. He had been there for 9 years. He made good money. He had a company car and an expense account, and I learned through some careful conversation with Audrey over several weeks, a performance bonus structure tied to quarterly numbers. I also learned, again through Audrey, who mentioned it without any awareness of what she was giving me, that Trevor had been having long lunches with a colleague named Dana. Audrey mentioned it the way wives sometimes mention things they're not quite sure how to categorize. She said Dana had texted Trevor late one night and that Trevor had said it was work stuff, and Audrey had said sure, probably, and moved on. I did not move on. I hired a private investigator, an older man, retired from the Asheville PD, who charged $85 an hour and communicated exclusively through a folded notepad and a very old iPhone. Within 3 weeks, he had photographs and, more importantly, documentation of Trevor and this woman at a hotel in Hendersonville, 11 miles from where my daughter lived, on 4 separate occasions over 2 months. I held on to all of it. I didn't use it yet. An engineer doesn't pull out the load-bearing beam until he's sure the rest of the structure is ready. Meanwhile, the police investigation was moving. In March, they executed a search warrant on Trevor's car and found, in the emergency kit in the trunk, the one with the jumper cables and the flares, a small, unlabeled container. The contents were sent to the state lab. The results came back in 6 weeks. Audrey found out about the arrest on a Tuesday morning in late April. Trevor was taken in for questioning. The arrest itself came 4 days later, on a Saturday. Audrey called me that morning, crying in a way I hadn't heard since her mother's funeral. This broken, gasping sound like she couldn't get enough air. I drove down to Weaverville immediately. I held my daughter in the driveway for a long time while Penny stood at the kitchen window, watching us with those serious eyes. Inside, I sat Audrey down at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. From the hallway on December 23rd. From Penny's 11 words. From the blood work and the toxicologist and the attorney and the private investigator. I laid it out the way I would present a structural report, in sequence, with documentation, with evidence she could see and hold. She didn't speak for a very long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" "Since December," I said. "And you didn't tell me." "I needed to know what I was dealing with first. I needed to protect you." She cried again. "I understand why. There's a particular kind of pain in learning that the person you loved, the person you built a life with and had a child with, had been slowly poisoning her father." I couldn't make that pain smaller. I could only sit across from her at her kitchen table and be there while she felt it. Penny came in from the living room at some point and climbed into my lap without asking, the way she always has. She put her head against my chest and she was quiet. "Grandpa," she said after a while. "Did I help?" I put my arms around her. "You saved my life, Penny." She nodded very seriously. "I thought so," she said. Trevor Holt was charged with attempted murder in the 1st degree and criminal poisoning. His attorney tried to argue the arsenic in the car had been planted. The jury did not find that persuasive. He was convicted in October of last year and sentenced to 22 years. Audrey filed for divorce the week after the arrest. She and Penny are still in the house in Weaverville. I drive down every Saturday. We still bake things. Lately it's been sourdough bread, which Penny has decided is her new specialty, and which comes out differently every single time, and which we eat anyway, and which somehow always tastes exactly right. Audrey is in therapy. She's doing the work. Slowly, and with her mother's stubbornness turned in the right direction. She started taking a ceramics class in September, and she shows me photos of the bowls and mugs she makes, misshapen and beautiful. And I keep every single one she gives me on the shelf in my kitchen. I think about what would have happened if Penny had not been under that bed looking for her sneaker. If she'd been anywhere else in the house. If she had decided, the way children sometimes do, that what she'd heard was probably nothing, or that adults didn't want to be bothered with children's worries. I don't let myself think about that for too long. But I think about it enough to know what it means. Here's the thing about bridges. The thing I learned in 34 years of building them. The ones that fail almost never fail because of a single catastrophic event. They fail because of accumulated small damage, hairline fractures, corrosion, stresses that nobody noticed because nobody was looking. A bridge can look completely fine from the outside, while something is quietly giving way underneath. The thing that saves a bridge is inspection. Someone willing to get down into the structure, to look at what's actually there, to listen to what the thing is telling them. My granddaughter listened. A 7-year-old girl with dark, curly hair and her grandmother's laugh, lying under her bed looking for a sneaker, heard something that adults might have dismissed. and she brought it to the one person she trusted to know what to do with it. I am 63 years old. I have built bridges that will stand for 100 years. And the most important thing I have ever done was crouch down in a hallway on December 23rd, look my granddaughter in the eyes, and listen to what she had to say. If there is a child in your life, I want you to hear this. They are paying attention to more than you know. They see the hairline fractures. They notice the things that don't add up. And when they come to you, when they grab your sleeve and pull you somewhere quiet and tell you something that sounds too strange to be real, please get down to their level. Look them in the eyes. Listen. I keep a row of ceramic mugs on the shelf in my kitchen. Misshapen ones, lopsided ones, one that can barely hold coffee without leaning. Audrey made them. She started ceramics after everything fell apart, and she gives me one every few weeks. And I keep every single one because they are proof that something broken can still make something beautiful. I think about cause and effect a lot these days, not in a mystical way. I'm an engineer. I don't do mystical. I mean it literally. Every outcome has a chain of events behind it, and if you trace that chain back far enough, you usually find a small moment that nobody thought mattered. Penny was looking for a sneaker. That's it. That's where the chain begins. A 7-year-old girl under a bed looking for her other shoe. Everything that came after, the blood work, the toxicologist, the arrest, the conviction, the misshapen mugs on my kitchen shelf, all of it traces back to that one ordinary moment. What I've been sitting with, 2 years out from that December, is this. Penny didn't just notice something, she decided it mattered. And then she decided to do something about it. Those are two different things, and most people, most adults, stop at the first one. We notice, we file it away. We tell ourselves we probably misunderstood. Penny didn't have enough years yet to learn that particular kind of cowardice, and so she walked up to me at a Christmas dinner and told me the truth. That took something from her. I don't think people give children enough credit for what it costs them to tell an adult something frightening. She didn't know what I would do with it. She didn't know if I believe her. She came to me anyway, and she said the words out loud, and that is a kind of courage I genuinely aspire to. At 63 years old, and I am not ashamed to say so. I also think about what I did with what she gave me. I didn't panic. I didn't confront Trevor over the Christmas ham and blow the whole thing before I had anything solid. I went home. I made 2 careful phone calls, and I started building a case the way I would approach any damaged structure, methodically, with documentation, without assumptions. 34 years of engineering taught me that the worst thing you can do when you discover a flaw is react before you understand it. You measure first, then you act. That discipline, the willingness to think clearly when everything in you wants to react, is something I worked at for decades. I didn't know I'd ever need it for something like this. Most of the time, that kind of steadiness just means you finish projects on time and under budget. Every now and then, it means something more. What I want to say to anyone who's listening is that none of this happened because I'm extraordinary. It happened because a little girl was honest, because I took her seriously, because I stayed calm long enough to do something useful, and because I refused to give up when the process was slow and frustrating and uncertain. 3 things, really. Doing right by the people who trust you, thinking before you move, and not stopping when it gets hard. Penny understood all 3 of that, instinctively, at 7 years old. Every Saturday I drive down to Weaverville. We bake bread that comes out differently every time. Penny has decided that the variations are the point, that the same loaf twice would be boring. And I think she is probably right about that too.